Hi, folks. This is Ruth Meed again. And I just want to touch base real quick and say if you like what I've been doing with the different training sessions, like, share, and subscribe down below. And feel free to send it on to other people. And if you put comments down there, that will make it pop up in the feed more for other people who might want this information. This particular session is going to be on writing goals and objectives for students with special needs in the homeschooling setting. And um, I will be possibly maybe doing a part two of this as well. I was asked to write up for a blog, but of course, blogs are very, very short. And when you're trying to explain something that's this important and sometimes hard to understand, you can't do it in 1,000 words. So I just decided to go ahead and create a video with this and put a little bit more information and some more examples for you to be able to reference if you need help with this. And do feel free to contact me. I'm going to have a bunch of resources down below for you to click on and check for different things as I walk my way down through this. You'll be able to look at those afterwards. Um, but like I said, feel free to like and share this. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Ruth Meed, and I taught for 27 years in public and private schools. And I am doing most of these things intentionally from a biblical perspective because there's lots of homeschooling parents and Christian parents out there who are looking for ways to think about special education from a biblical perspective and how to help their kids who struggle academically. So my background is I worked with children in a home for girls for 7 years. So I know quite a bit about abuse and neglect and also the incredible educational trauma that happens because of abuse and neglect. But I also know more about the academic environment because, like I said, I've taught for a total of 21 years in different settings in either Christian schools or public schools. I have a master's degree in special education and a master's degree in biblical counseling. So I have a wide range of experiences that help me to be able to speak to these things that I bring to the table. And I try to boil it down to make it make sense in these videos, but you're always welcome to contact me. I have people contacting me on a regular basis. Some people want to access me more often, so they sign up for personal coaching and things like that. But that just gives you an idea of who I am. And again, if you find this stuff valuable, like, share, subscribe down below, and add some comments so I know some other ideas of things to do going forward. So let's just jump right in here with IEP goals and objectives. I'm just going to switch my screen so I can actually, I'm using obviously a little bit of a prompt here so that I can keep going and run this in a logically straightforward way. But there's going to be some times when I'm going to stop and share my screen with you so that you see some different things that are accessible to you either through my pages or just through a quick search online somewhere. Let me turn off my phone real quick because that'll be annoying to me if it um, actually rings while I'm trying to work my way through this. Okay, so IEP, goals, objectives. This is a foreign language, right? And when you talk about goals, that's a 4-letter word, at least for some people. So it makes you think, oh no, this is something bad. And if you're a homeschooling mama, you're sitting there thinking, I don't have time for all this. I can't figure all these things out. I barely have time to survive every day. I'm trying to get my kid to doctor's appointments. I have therapies. I have other things I've got to deal with. How in the world am I supposed to figure out all this stuff? So if you have felt this way, my goal is to break this down so that it's not as confusing for you and a little bit more user friendly. And I also want to tell you, you're not alone. There's lots of homeschooling parents out there, and they're all struggling with these same concerns and questions. And I get contacted from people on a fairly regular basis asking me for questions and advice. And I do the best I can to answer their questions based on my experience. And like I said, I've had quite a few experiences that have helped me to approach situations. So hang in there, mama, just take her one thing at a time. And like I said, I'm going to try to break this down so that it makes sense for you. And I'm going to have user-friendly forms and examples down below for you to click on to access more information that should help you here. And I have a couple of other pages that I've started to create some things on, but here on this YouTube channel, you're going to find a whole series of videos for homeschooling mamas. I got through episode number 7, and I've got the other episodes written up. I've just got to finish them up and start working my way through getting those recorded as well. But somebody specifically asked me to do something on the goals piece, so I thought I'd get this done first. So in order to effectively work your way down through writing goals for your child, there's a certain focus that you need to have. You got to write those realistic goals and how to track their progress in actually meeting the goals. So I've got 4 different things that we're going to talk about, and then some little points underneath of those. So the first one is, what is the standard for the subject or grade level that you are hoping to work with for your kids? So this is, again, where I'm going to just jump right off here and share my screen, because all I typed in was state standards for, and in this case, I went ahead and picked South Carolina to show you this one. So as you can see, it pops up and there's all the state standards for South Carolina. Now, when I started to type in the words state standards, it actually popped up North Carolina state standards. So whatever state you're in, you could do Illinois state standards, and you're going to pop up with a page that you might have to go a couple screens deep, but I've gone ahead and done this one, and I'll leave the access to this particular one on my page because I was familiar with South Carolina because I lived there for 20 years. But I also have, if you're here in Canada, I've got the New Brunswick standards that, and I'll have that on a separate document where I've got some different web links to different places that I already know. So if you just want to jump on those and save yourself time, feel free. So let's say you want to go into, we'll pick English for a second. When you've got the English language arts, and then you click on the word standards, it's going to pull up some screens here for you. And you've got career ready standards. So that would be for your high schoolers. You've got college level standards for high schoolers. And so then what you do is you just go ahead and click on those standards. That one's for career, but if you notice, there's literally an entire document here. Now, the thing that's really scary about this is you go, what in the world is this, and how in the world would I recognize it? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to, this is for high school, but notice how it's by grade. So kindergartners, what should a kindergartner know how to do? There's grade 1, there's grade 2. If you don't know the first thing about writing goals or objectives, this helps you because it just tells you, okay, what's my kindergartner supposed to be able to do when it comes to education. So let's pick grade 1 for a second here. So translate, wondering questions. They're asking questions about different things. So this is how they can actually figure out how to read. Draw conclusions from relationships and patterns. Reflect on findings and take some actions. So you read a little story that says, we need to clean our room. How do you clean your room? I'm going with a grade level example here, obviously grade 1. And you've given them a little list. That's the little findings they have. And then they got to take some action. So I've got to go through these steps to clean my room. Recognizing distinguishing features of a sentence. So this is sentence writing. So sentence is a subject, a verb, and some kind of thing, either an adjective or a noun afterwards. So you're teaching them just those basic steps. So you pick maybe one of these or 2 of these, depending on the grade level that your child is in. If you're doing this, I would suggest that you go ahead and download this document and just focus on your grade level. Ignore everything else. Just focus on the grade level of your child and go down through this. And you're just going to check off the areas where, okay, I think my kid can already do this, or they don't know how to do this one. So let's go ahead and do that one. Read words with inflectional endings. Recognize and read grade level appropriate irregularly spelled words. So you've got read or read, spelled the same way, but it's pronounced differently depending on the sentence that it's in. So different things like that. So you're going to access the grade level standards, and you're going to think about your child as you wander down through that. So I'm going to go back one screen with this because that was a big chart, and that's hard to deal with. So the next chart you can look at is this one, because it's got language arts by grade level. So then when you click on that, it only gives you your grade level. And most websites, especially in every state in the US and like I said, I found the ones for New Brunswick, Canada, because I live here now, fairly quickly. The same thing. They, if you look for New Brunswick Department of Education, they list them by the grade level, and you might have to take a couple steps in. And like I said, I'll have those links down at the bottom for you to access, so you don't have to hunt and try to find out where these pages are. I'll put them in there for you, make it a little bit easier for you. But let's say you've got a third grader, so I click on grade 3, and there it is. The standard: formulate relevant self-generated questions based on some kind of interest or need or something to be investigated. So for a little third grader, this can be as simple as, Mommy, how do we get, how do they get the pencil lead on a pencil, or the little gum rubber thing on the end of a pencil? And you can do some reading up on it, or you can do a research thing online. Now I use that one as an example because when I was teaching in Greenville County, I actually had some kids who wanted to know, how do you get the little piece of the little piece of eraser on the end of a pencil? What do they do? How do they do that? So then we looked it up and we did some research, and they did a little tiny report on that. So that's just a quick example for you of things. But it lists the little standards, and then it spells out some different steps down in there that help you to figure out what exactly they want. And you're not going to pick every single one of these, especially for a student who's got disabilities. And that brings us back to, let me look at my other screen here for a minute. Gotta find it. There it is. Because you're going to find the subject for grade level, and it's suggested. This is not you have to do every single one of these. This is where you're going to learn your student. You're going to figure out what they know, and you're going to make it realistic for them. So you're going to look down through there, and you're going to think, okay, my child probably can do this, this, and this. So we're going to pick just 2 or 3. You're not going to, especially with students who struggle, you're not going to go through the entire list and say, I've checked off every single one. No. That's not realistic. That's not realistic for you as a mama just trying to take this on. It's also not realistic for your child. So it's better to take it in small chunks. The journey of 1,000 miles is taken one step at a time. So you're going to kind of think your way through, how much do you think my child can accomplish here? And make it realistic for them. So are there steps that they can do? If so, what are they? Are there steps they can't do? If so, what are they? Just and knock those out so that they're not overwhelmed with that process. So the first question was, let's look at the standards and goals. The second question is, how am I going to make them realistic for my child? And the other thing you're going to think about when you're picking these goals is you're going to make them realistic to the real world. Can you tell them how to use this as they grow older and become an adult? Sometimes this is easy. Add to keep track of a bank account, or measure things because you're baking in the kitchen, or if you're building something for the guys, you want it to be a real world application. And you've got end goals where they want to be able to do, maybe construct a whole house if they're a guy, or some girls enjoy some of the construction types of things too. I've done some fun things with that. My dad taught me how to do quite a bit of stuff. But you just take it one step at a time. So when it comes to measurement, if you've got elementary kids, you're only going to get them to recognize like an inch or a half inch or a centimeter or a millimeter and some of those kinds of things. And then later on, larger quantities, bigger numbers, fractions of numbers, those kinds of things. And the nice thing is, with each grade level, if I switched over to math on those standard sheets, you would see that they've got it broken down again by grade level, what you should be able to do. So sometimes it's just an obvious academic standard. Sometimes there are some things that you want them to learn that are actually more emotional related. You're teaching them a new skill that they might be able to use in life, but you can't necessarily say, okay, you're going to always use this in your lifetime. But what you can say is, this particular activity is demonstrating or teaching you perseverance, that perfect practice makes perfect. We've always heard the practice makes perfect, but it's really perfect practice that makes perfect. If you have imperfect practice, it makes it permanent, but it may not be right. So that's where, when you're working on things, it's better to take a small skill that they can learn and do it well, than it is to try to take on a bunch of skills and then kind of sort of learn some way how to do them and actually start doing them wrong. And I've run into that where I've had students that I've worked with that unfortunately were taught for so long the wrong way that it took a while to retrain them to actually do it the right way. So the emphasis is making sure that they're understanding how to do it right the first time. And then if they do any practice, they're still doing it the right way and practicing it that way. So that's a skill that you're teaching them. That might be listing one of your goals, that they are learning to persevere and work on a skill, even if they don't understand the end result, because they are wanting to become um, adults who know how to persevere and work their way for something. And let me say this, sometimes kids who have learning disabilities are stronger as adults than those of us who haven't struggled academically, because they have to work at it. So they learn the persistence, they learn the perseverance, they learn the stick to it, that sometimes people who it comes to them way too easily. I have a nephew, and at one point he's like, "Oh, I don't like this, education stuff," but he hadn't learned the stick to it because education came to him so easily. So he ran into other areas in his life where he had to learn the perseverance and those kinds of things. And at that point, he was kind of pushing against it because he was like, "Ugh." So this is where I wanted to throw in a little biblical principle for you when it comes to this idea of persevering and working at things. In the Bible, there is a phrase that's used three different times: Hebrews 5:14, Hebrews 12:11, and 2 Peter 2:14. That basically uses this word gymnazo. The verse that I'm thinking of in Hebrews 5 says, "You have your senses exercised to discern good and evil." And that word gymnazo is the same word that we use to exercise in the gym. So you're developing training, you're developing muscles in your arms and legs when you're training in the gym. Well, in actual fact, current brain research has demonstrated that our brains are challenged that way too, and we are exercised by mental activities. It develops more dendrites, it develops more synapses, and is similar to the way that muscles grow when they're exercised in other parts of the body. So there's websites like lumosity.com, and that's spelled LUMOSITY.com, where you are doing brain exercises. And they sometimes might seem a little bit pointless, but in actual fact, they help you. And I've done this with other videos. You can check out some of my other videos of things, 10 things to do over the vacation, lists different kinds of games that you can use to strengthen brain muscle as well. So having your kids play with actual hands-on manipulative games isn't not just it's not just a game. It's actually an activity that's developing brain skills and thinking skills. So it's worth your bother to have them doing those kinds of activities. And that word gymnazo in the Bible is telling us that using your brain, thinking through things with your brain, makes you more effective than if you just sat there like a bump on a log scrolling down through a screen. So we can exercise our brain and develop certain dendrites and nerve endings in your brain because you've worked at something and you've persevered at something, and you develop more brain power. And when it comes to, even, the verse says your brain is exercised to discern right and wrong and good and evil. But at the same time, when you're working on an academic task, learning to say, yes, this is the correct answer, or no, this is not the correct answer, is also training your brain. So that's the good, or it's right or it's wrong. And so again, your brain is being exercised when you do those kinds of things. The simple choices that you make early in life can set you up for um, developing an understanding of deeper concepts later. So that can be a goal that you think about with your child, that's separate even from the academic piece. Um, Once you have decided some realistic things that you want to do, then you actually sit down and start writing the specific goal. So you know the standard that's suggested, you've got a goal for your child. Now you ask yourself a specific series of questions. As you think your way through these questions, be very careful to consider things that you can see and measure. What do I want my child to do for this skill area? How well do I want them to do it? How are they going to show me that they can do it to that level of accuracy? What things do I need to give them so that they can demonstrate the skill? In the education world, you'll see that the expressions observable and measurable shows up quite a bit. And that simply means that you can see that your child can do this. Is there a way to measure it on a test or a quiz or some other form of assessment? Now, let me talk for half a second about assessment. I've done other videos about more things related to assessment, but on this particular one, assessment just simply means that it's a worksheet or a quiz or a test or a written report or an oral report or some kind of activity, a diorama, a video, something like that, or a project that lets you know your child can do what you want them to do. One thing I've often told my students who struggled, especially with test anxiety, was that the only purpose for a test was so that I would know better the things that I needed to teach because they still didn't understand it. So don't fear the test, don't fear the activity. It helps me to know a better way that I've got to teach them. Um, so if it's something they need to learn to review or do something similar with it, or maybe we need to just step back from that activity for a while, go do something else and then come back to it. And that's beneficial as well. Sometimes parents think that they've got to keep pushing a particular skill until a child is almost wacky trying to deal with it. And sometimes you've got to let it go. You've got to give them a break. You've got to let them not have to be like constantly in front of this particular skill. If it's a frustration, it's okay to step back, go somewhere else, do something else. So we've got a goal. Let me say that again. What do I want my child to do? How well do I want them to do it? How are they going to show me they can do it? And what things do I need to give them so they can actually demonstrate that skill? So let's use an example. A universal standard in most countries is that children should know their multiplication facts by the end of at least third grade. We know that kids who struggle may not be able to master this as quickly, but we're not going to get bogged down with that initially. We're just going to start with the basic example, and that's what you're going to do too. You're going to look at the standard, start with the basic example, then you'll think about your child specifically. So how would I write a goal? The first step to writing a goal is to say, okay, I want my child to do their multiplication. So by the end of the year, that ultimate goal, that end result is they will be able to recite the multiplication facts from 1 to 10 by the end of the year. Now, some people like to say, well, let's do 1 to 12 or something like that. But you don't necessarily have to do that. And I just realized I should probably hit the stop share button. For a minute here. So let me go back to my other screen. That gave you a chance to look down through lots of different screens on ways to types of standards that you could look at. So how many of you were actually reading that screen instead of listening to me, I wonder? That's something that we tend to do. If we see something in front of us, we tend to look at that and not catch what was being said. So let me go back up here for just a minute and let me ask this again. We're going to write a goal. What do I want my child to do? How well do I want them to do it? How are they going to show me that they can do it to that level of accuracy? And what are things that I need to give them so that they can demonstrate that skill? So back to our multiplication question. By the end of third grade, I want my third grader to be able to recite their multiplication facts from 1 to 10. Now we need to figure out our steps or objectives for how they'll get there. And sometimes they call them benchmarks as well. These steps are often referred to, as objectives in the education world. So you might see goals or benchmarks or steps or standards that you want the child to get to. So our goal is our end result. The objectives are the steps. So let's look at the multiplication example. Typically, the easiest ones to memorize when you're multiplying after you multiply by 1 are 2, 5, and 10. And most children have learned how to do the skip counting of those numbers by second grade or in second grade. So let's set up our objectives or steps like this. By the end of the first 9 weeks, let me go ahead and show you this screen for a second so that you can see how I've written this up right here. So to review, our goal is our end result. So we set up our objectives or steps like this. By the end of the first 9 weeks, my child will be able to recite all the multiplication facts for 2, 5, and 10. Can you see that or hear that? Can they somehow demonstrate that specific skill to you? Yes, they can. Now, the one thing I didn't add in here is you can say by 100% of the time or 80% of the time or 90% of the time. And then you've got a specific percentage of accuracy that you want to have. So then by the end of the second 9 weeks, my child will be able to recite all the multiplication facts for 3, 4, and 6. By the end of the third 9 weeks, my child will be able to recite the multiplication facts for 7, 8, and 9. Those are some of the more difficult ones. And then by the end of the year, my child may be able to recite all of the multiplication facts for the numbers 1 through 10. So that's the basic goal. But now let's think about modifying it for a child who has a disability. I'm going to move this up a little bit. So we've got the basic idea. You set your goals and your objectives, but now we need to be considering what's realistic for your child. Up in that sentence, I used the measurement word all of the multiplication facts, which would be 100%. But if your child struggles with memorizing things, you need to consider setting the bar a little bit lower to a realistic challenge without causing them frustration. You might decide you're going to be happy if they can do 80% or 8 out of 10 of the facts. For them to be successful based on their particular skills. They may only be able to do 2, 5, and 10. The other stuff really truly might be too overwhelming for them at this age and at this grade level, and they're given their specific abilities or disabilities. Another thing you might change is instead of reciting those facts, you get them to write them. Or if they're more physically challenged, point to a number on a chart to show that they know that fact. So we've set a goal. We've figured out our standard. We've set our goal. We've figured out how to modify that goal for your child. And then the other part of it that goes into the tracking part of this is getting your child to take some ownership for what they've done. I highly recommend that once you come up with a basic idea of what you want to do, that you sit down with your child and encourage them in that process of setting goals. So let me switch back here again so that you're not constantly seeing the same screen all the time. If you want this whole script that I've done here, again, I'll have that in the links below. You'll be able to pull that back up if you want the written out version of this as well. And I'm going to work on getting somebody to start doing the closed captioning at the bottom of my videos so that that's there available for people who want to read it as I'm talking as well. Okay, let's go back to where we are here. Get your child engaged in the process. And I do mean at any age. So basically you figure out some goals and you say, okay, by the end of the year, because you're a second grader, here's some things that you should be able to do. So we're going to sit down, we're going to create a little chart here, and we're going to set some goals, and we're going to try to do them one at a time. And you teach them even from a very young age how to do this. Now I've created a video on how to help your child meet a deadline. So you can go check that one out. That's also in my YouTube channel here, and that'll give you a more specific way to specifically talk down through teaching a child how to set some goals and how to follow through on them. But this is just giving you an idea where it's worth your bother. It's important for you to take the time to get your child involved in this process, because they'll take the ownership, they'll work harder if they know that they're part of it and they've had some decision making in it, and then they get to congratulate themselves when they have accomplished the goals. So I've got some different charts that I want to show you here for a minute. Let me go back here to share, and I'll show you a couple different kinds of charts that you can use, and these again are going to be available in links below. So here's one chart that I've used with students where sometimes I had kids who had executive functioning problems. They couldn't stay on track of anything. So one of their goals was, my student will keep track of their work each day based on the chart, and they will have their material ready for class. So on Monday, they needed to have their paper and pencil. They needed to have their binder ready. They need to have their planner or calendar or agenda that they're using. They needed to make sure they did the classwork, or if they had homework, to bring their homework back. If I had them doing something independently, they needed to bring it back. And then if I had munchkins who had issues with behavior, how was their behavior? Was it okay? Was it not? And I have different charts that specifically track behavior and different levels of behavior. So if you're interested in those, I've got those. Then in this particular case, because these were middle school students, I was teaching them the difference between fractions, decimals, and percents. So they would take this fraction out of 6. If they had 5 out of 6, then I had taught them how to convert it to a decimal and then to percent. So each day they're doing one little practice of that skill as they're keeping track of the different things that they needed to do to be effective in the class for the day. And I found that this really worked with those middle schoolers who otherwise they couldn't figure out what in the world to do with fractions, decimals, and percent. They started to see the connection between those because they were practicing one every single day. And after a couple, 2 or 3 weeks of this, I changed this and we did something different. But it's so that it's not just the check sheet, it becomes a tool for teaching other academic skills. So that's one example of a chart for tracking progress. Now let me show you another one. There's this one, and some of these are a little more simple. Some of them, this was just simply a matter of whether or not they were able to do some basic skills. So did they do the vocabulary words? Did they have their homework? Did they finish their classwork? Did they do the copying that they needed to do from the workbook or the board for that particular class period? And then we put dates in there on those kinds of things. So, again, sometimes it's just a very simple chart. If you've got a child who can't handle the more complicated chart I just showed you, you might go with a very simple chart like this, where they're just putting a little X or a question mark or a check mark right in here. Yes, I did my vocabulary words. No, I didn't have any homework. So, but I did do my classwork today. So they put a little check mark in there, and they copied the work from the board. So, like that. And you could put it in as words if they wanted to write it as words, or you could literally just do it as a little X like that. And then keep track over the course of like a week and count up their scores of how many they got done and reward them. And there's, I'm starting to realize that I probably need to do a lesson on rewards for student academic behavior, because people think that you're bribing a kid if you give them some kind of prize for doing their work. Well, no, we get paid to do our jobs. We get paid for, the work that we do as adults. And the interesting thing, if you look at it from a biblical perspective, is God is the one who instituted the reward system. He put the crowns in the Bible for us to say, if you will go out and tell other people about the Lord and win people to Christ, you get the soul winner's crown. If you're a person in leadership as a pastor, you get the shepherd's crown when you get to heaven for being a faithful leader in the world of the church and encouraging others in Christ. So God instituted a series of rewards in the Bible. So rewarding a child for good behavior is not wrong. Trying to bribe them to do something wrong is something different. And bribery is that. You bribe somebody when you want them to do something wrong, and the only way they'll do it is if you pay them somehow. No, that's bribery. Rewarding people is something totally different, and it's all over the Word of God. So it's not wrong to reward your child legitimately for doing the right thing. As a matter of fact, I highly encourage it. Some children are more motivated by rewards. Okay, so that was kind of a little aside. Let's go back to where we are with this. I was showing you how to track some of these behaviors that you're measuring. With the things like your math, like adding and subtracting, you're literally just going to have a worksheet to check that off. But if you've got other skills like the executive functioning skills, then you need some of these charts that I've just showed you to help your child stay on track with their executive functioning skills, their ability to stay organized, their ability to stay on task. So let's use an example from middle school or high school to give you an idea of how you might write a goal for them. So you've got a middle school child. You want them to correctly use in a sentence the vocabulary words you've given, and you want them spelled correctly, as well as the way they use it in a sentence demonstrates their comprehension. But if you write up the goal this way, my middle school child will be able to spell and then correctly use in a sentence the given vocabulary word that goes with the book they're reading. Let me show you back here the page that I'm reading off of. because I think some people prefer to actually see some of the words as we're talking through this. So I'm just going to keep sharing this with you. So my middle school child will be able to spell and then correctly use in a sentence the given vocabulary words that go with the book they've read. Please note that there's actually two skills there: spelling, then correctly using it in a sentence. Because when you correctly use it in a sentence, you're talking about, you could be talking about two things actually, even with that. Correctly using it could be it's in the right order in the sentence, which is grammar, or it's got the right meaning, which is vocabulary understanding. So the cue here word is use vocabulary words. So when they're using a vocabulary word, you're wanting them to demonstrate that they understand the meaning, even if they might not be able to put it exactly right in sequence because they struggle with written expression skills or those kinds of things. Now, normally vocabulary words are spelling words. So you only have, if you're wise, you only have about 5 of those a week, especially with children who struggle, where they have to understand the meaning as well as spell it correctly. Spelling and using correctly. And I just talked my way through that. Make sure that you understand what you're specifically looking for your child to do. So let's look at our goal here. By the end of the reading unit on Johnny Tremaine, my child will be able to accurately use the vocabulary words spelled correctly in a sentence with 80% accuracy. So that's basically talking all the vocabulary words that you've used for the entire book. If you word your goal like this, it means they're going to get 1 mark for spelling it correctly and 1 mark for using it correctly in a sentence. You would need to make that very clear to them that in order to get that particular skill accurate, they have to do both things. I created this goal to illustrate the fact that some children may be able to do one or the other, but not both. In that case, you would need to pick one skill. My child will be able to spell the vocabulary word correctly when they write it in a sentence. Or my child will be able to write a sentence that demonstrates they understand the meaning. So again, this is how you have to think about the specific skill you want to measure with your child as you're writing these goals. It's not okay to make education and learning a frustration for your children. If they are being extremely frustrated and melting down, then you need to step back. You do need to make it challenging. You do need to make it realistic. But if they're reaching the point where they're completely melting down, then you have to reevaluate. You got to step back and say, okay, wait, we got to look at this goal again, and maybe we need to back off, or maybe we need to add some extra objectives in there or some extra steps because we're missing a step in here between that's made it too challenging. A child who's challenged will continue to grow. A child who's under constant frustration will start to demonstrate frustration and stress, and the brain literally starts to shut down at that point, and education doesn't happen. So you're going backwards if your child is constantly frustrated with what you're trying to do with them. And there are ways to work with some of those things and figure those kind of things out, but that's for a separate lesson. There are times when you might allow that spelling error in order to make sure that they've used it and demonstrated their understanding of a word. Then you come back again with another remedial side lesson where if you want them to figure out that spelling is very important, for instance, you would have them type a word in a search engine, and then they discover if they don't spell it correctly on the internet, they're not going to get the information they want because the internet demands that things are spelled correctly in order to do a search result. This makes a goal or an objective much more realistic to the real world situation and helps them to understand the importance of why you need to spell words correctly. This activity would make more sense to upper elementary or middle school students than it might be to a younger elementary student. That's why I suggest a middle school level for this one. For more examples, language arts goals and objectives, let me just show you real quick. So stop share there. And I'm going to pull up another screen real quick. I have created more sample and of course it's not letting me see the one I want to see here. Let me see. Well, I'll pull this up. I've created a couple more sample charts for you to use. This one's actually more related to, well, it gives you a couple of examples, but I have another one that's loaded with samples of different ways that you can write up goals and objectives. So I'm going to exit out of this screen. Let's see if it won't let me pull up the other screen to show you that one. Yeah, okay. So I took some time with this particular activity with the samples to show you samples that you could pull up from several different areas. So I did a music goal. So if you're a music teacher and you want your child to start learning some things about music, the goal, the student will be able to play songs with that use any or all four of the notes on each of the four strings for the basic 8 notes in an octave for a violin. So you're going to use C, B, C, G, D, A scales. Your objective, the student will learn the proper fingering positions to make the note. The student will play the song Twinkle that uses the repetition of those D and A strings. The student will be able to play Twinkle in another key using the replication of the notes A and E. So that helps them practice using the 4 notes on a violin and where to find them in the fingering positions. That just gives you an example. You can measure that specifically. I could look at a child and say, yep, they've got their finger in the right place. They've got it on the right position. They've made the sound. They've been able to play the song Twinkle. So they can do that. So that's a music goal. Then I have some examples of reading goals here. Student will be able to read orally and demonstrate an application of decoding for their grade level with no more than 3 errors on a passage. In decoding words. So some of these are actually not 100% the best wording, and that's why I'm fixing some of them. I put it this way so that you could see an example of one where you kind of go, well, what's a false start? We talked about decoding over here. How come we said false starts over here? So we got to make the words match. If we're going to say that we want the child to decode at grade level, then we no more than 3 decoding errors on your passage. This is also an example of another chart. You can literally just go ahead and type in your objectives, the testing method that you're going to use, and the mastery that you want. And then the day that they get it done, you just put the date in there. So this is one way to track, for instance, reading goals. So this is where I'm showing you different things. With the music, they're playing something, you're watching them. And if you wanted to, you could just put those goals there, put a date when they mastered those things, or you can put it in a chart form like this. And if you're looking for, I'm actually going to create this where all of these are in charts instead of just printed out in words like that, so that you can access those. Again, they'll be down below in the links below. So then written expressions, student will be able to complete 10 journal entries demonstrating their ability to express their thoughts on paper. So what are they going to do? They're going to write something. The mastery goal is they've actually made 10 journal entries. Now, here, I personally probably wouldn't put completion. I would put at least 1 sentence for each of 10 days. When I was working with 3rd graders who struggled with written expression skills, if they just wrote 1 sentence, today I learned how to put the eraser on the end of a pencil, I'm using that example from earlier, then I was happy with that. So again, the better wording here would be 10 journal entries of at least 1 sentence. Then you're specifically measuring, you know what you're looking for them to do, and they know what you're looking for them to do, and they can accomplish that goal. Now, if they can do that really easily, then you might want them to do 2 sentences. And your high schoolers, you're probably going to want 3-sentence paragraphs for their little journal entries. So you're going to adjust this again based on the age and grade level of your student, but you can write it up that way. So there's some written expression examples. Then if I go down farther, I've got some executive functioning examples here. This is a little harder to see. Let me make it a little bigger for you. Executive functioning. So John averages 10 unexcused tardies to the table for a month. So you've got one of your kids and they're just taking their good old time getting to the table every month. And that's what's happening. Now, PLOP stands for their present levels of performance. And I'm assuming you've heard that if you're on the page that I created this particular video for. We've already talked about present levels of performance, but that's what PLOP stands for, present levels of performance. What are they doing right now? And it helps that you know what they're doing right now before you write that goal, because you're not going to write a goal that doesn't match with what they're doing. So he's having a hard time getting to the table. So the goal is by the end of the year, John will average less than 1 unexcused tardy per month. So then we're going to say by February the 1st, he's only going to have 5. And by April the 1st, he's only going to have 2. And then by the end of the year, he's going to have none. You could add that extra objective in there. Or Jeremy doesn't submit his assignments to you and get them done. By the end of the year, he'll regularly submit all the assigned homework on time, or you might call it seat work, depending on how you handle this particular, like independent work, perhaps it might be the word that you use with your children. So by November 15th, he's going to submit 75% of his homework assignments. And I would add the words in here without reminder, because again, you're trying to teach him to take ownership of his learning. And then by January 15th, he's going to have 85% of all his homework assignments. And this is where you literally would count the homework assignments and use that other chart that I showed you that had the homework thing. You would just literally go down through that and say, look, on this homework column, maybe let me go back there so you understand how these connect to each other. Share. Right here. So on the homework column right here, you would literally just count those all up and take the average. If he's a middle schooler or a high schooler, you're going to teach him how to do the average. So that's another math skill you've just taught him, but he's kept track of how he's done all week long getting those things done. And yeah, you've got the homework column. Has he done the homework? And I did homework here. You can change the words any way you like, depending on what you're looking for with those kind of things. But that's how that tracks. So you've got the goal over there that he's going to pass his homework in on time. How are you going to track it? Well, you've already got this sheet here. And then if you wanted to track his executive functioning skills, he's got his stuff ready for class. There's the way you track that. You've got these all here. You count them up and you get a percentage off of those for your little goal chart that you're keeping for him. So that's how you take a goal and then you actually track it. So that, again, I'm hoping this makes sense to you. Feel free to leave me comments if some of this doesn't make sense, how you make these things line up with each other and make sense with each other. So then I also had an example of a science goal, just again, to give you something more to, just another skill area, just some more examples. I found when I was learning how to do this, the more examples I saw and the more I thought my way through them, then they started to make sense to me. So let me share this screen again so you visually see it. So let's talk about science. An example for a high schooler. You want them to recognize the bones of the body for a science unit. So your goal is, given a blank bone chart and the alphabetized word bank, my child will correctly label the 20 major bones of the body with 90% accuracy. I have added the word alphabetized word bank because, again, if we're working with children with special needs, it may not be as important that they memorize every single word and be able to pull it out of their head as much as that they recognize the major bones of the body if they have the words available to them. Now, I used this example with a high schooler that I was working with. He said, why do I have to know this stuff? I'm going to be a diesel mechanic, so why do I need to know about the bones of the body? And I said, well, if you have a truck drop on you when you're in the shop and it hits your leg, your femur, your upper leg, you need to understand that that bone, if it gets broken, you can bleed out. So you have to touch a certain vein or a certain point in your upper thigh. And I showed him where that line is in your upper thigh to stop the blood flow or greatly reduce the blood flow until emergency people get there. And he basically sat back and said, oh, so even doing a chart like this where the kid might be, I can't memorize all those words. Why do I have to know it? It's more for the real life example of, because if your health is in danger or you break a bone or something like that, you want to understand which bones are more important for holding you up, or like the femur. If you break your shin bones, your tibia or your fibula, they will heal. They'll fix more quickly, but you won't bleed out. But if you break your femur, which is your upper thigh bone, you could bleed out before somebody gets to you. So you have to protect yourself in those ways. And that's why you want them to learn these skills. So they may not need to memorize every word, but they do need to at least recognize what the bones are and where they are in the body. So that's our, oops, I hit my little ball on my mouse here for a second. Sorry. So you've got your set of objectives. Given a filled in chart and a blank chart, my child will copy into the blank chart the bones labeled correctly for the 10 major bones of the body. Notice I haven't done all 20 yet. And notice they've got a blank chart and the filled in chart. So they're copying back and forth between the two. So that you're helping them at this stage. Then the next one is you give them a filled in chart and a blank chart and to copy all the bones for the 20 major bones of the body. So the first week they do the 10, the second week they do the 20. Then you start to challenge them a little bit where they've got a blank chart and their word bank and they labeled the 10 main bones of the body. And then they have a blank chart and the word bank and they label the 20. So this is where you're working at this in steps to get to that ultimate goal of they can actually label the 20 major bones of the body with accuracy on a chart. And this is again where under normal circumstances with a high school student, you would just say they need to know the 20 bones of the body, period. But when you've got a student who struggles or they can't remember all these things or they've got memory issues, then you would, this is how you would modify it so that they're still recognizing them, they're still able to see them, and you're working your way through careful steps to help them get to where they need to go. So again, I will have more science objectives and things down below that you can get to. So once you have determined those goals, how do you track them? And I've already showed you as we were going intentionally, but I'll just go ahead and revisit this particular one chart. And you'll see how I fixed this one now that it's at the bottom. Sam will demonstrate basic reading, decoding, and comprehension of grade level by the end of 5th grade with at least 80% accuracy. So he'll read and demonstrate adequate application of decoding skills for his grade level. He'll do some oral reading, and he'll do it with no more than 3 decoding errors on a passage of 5 sentences. So you know specifically that you need him to read something that has 5 sentences in it, and you're going to count how many decoding errors he makes. So it's very specific, and then as soon as he can do that, then you write the date down here. Then Sam will read silently and answer 10 questions about a passage he's read. So you could potentially have a little comprehension test where he has to answer 10 questions about something he read silently to himself. And then obviously it's just a graded thing. He got 8 out of 10 right, or he got 9 out of 10, or how many he got right. Then Sam will read a passage and discuss the information within the passage. So for instance, I had a student who loved snowmobiles and tearing snowmobiles apart and small engine repair. And so instead of making him read about dolls and dollhouses, I'm being a little bit silly with that, but you think about what a child is interested in and you put the reading in front of them that will interest them. So I put a little magazine in front of him that had to do with skidoos and working on skidoos. And after he'd read that passage, then I asked him 4 to 5 questions and said, okay, so what does it say about the engine? What kind of oil do you need? What kind of gas should you put in there? Is it a 2-stroke? Is it a 4-stroke? What kind of air filter does it need? And get him to answer those questions. And if he can answer those questions based on reading that stuff about the skidoo, then you just literally write the date in there. So that's just a way, again, to track your goals. So that pretty well covers how do you write goals and how do you track those goals. And if you have more questions, feel free to put the comments down below. If you found this helpful, put comments down below. Click like, subscribe, and share because that helps me get this out to more people who might find this helpful. And thank you for your time. And it's a pleasure to be able to explain to you how to work with your students. And that's my joy. Now, if you're interested in a Bible study book for your teenagers and on up, I've written a Bible study book on the faithfulness of God. That's there. If you're looking for curriculum for behavior or challenging things with your kids, I would recommend The Peacemaker by Ken Sande. I don't get anything for recommending him. I'm just telling you it's a really good curriculum. And he has the teenage version as well. Awesome book on relational skills. And it's all done from a biblical Christian perspective. So very helpful material there. If you have any questions, let me know. Again, the links will be below. Click like, subscribe, and share. And I'm wishing you a best day in the Lord.